The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Lewis, I'm so glad you are here today because we have a new national poll from Quinnipiac University. Hillary Clinton's lead nationally on the Democratic side is increasingly going away. Donald Trump's lead on the Republican side is absolutely huge right now. On the Democratic side, the new poll from Quinnipiac has Hillary Clinton at 44 nationally and Bernie Sanders at 42 nationally. This is within the margin of error. This is a statistical tie. This is not the first poll in the last 2 weeks to make this claim. It is yet another poll suggesting that the national race on the Democratic side has tightened into a virtual tie. Now, on the Republican side, Donald Trump's lead dropped briefly a couple of weeks ago, and it has now jumped way back up, Lewis. Trump currently at 39% nationally. In second place, not Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio at 19%, Cruz at 18%. Statistically, within the margin of error, an effective tie. Surprised, Lewis, at either of these numbers?
A little bit surprised with the Donald Trump numbers.
Yeah.
But other than that, no.
Interestingly, if we look at some of the internals of the poll, the gender gap on the Democratic side has been reduced significantly. Women back Hillary over Bernie 47 to 41, only a 6% gap on the women vote. Men back Bernie Sanders 44 to 40, a relatively small gender gap there as well, and it continues to shrink. And interestingly, on one particular issue, Bernie Sanders is doing significantly better than Hillary Clinton. 87% of poll respondents say that Bernie Sanders is honest and trustworthy. Only 61% of likely Democratic voters say that Hillary Clinton is honest and trustworthy. It does seem, Lewis, like the Trump train cannot be stopped, at least in the short run. But I believe that longer term, the problem for Donald Trump is going to be the 35 or 39 or whatever percent. He's fluctuated between 35 and 40 over the last 2-3 months. His 35 to 40% support may well be his ceiling. If we get to the convention, as I have said, with 35 to 40% of Republicans supporting Donald Trump, and 60 to 65% of Republicans supporting someone other than Donald Trump, the non-Trump supporting Republicans are not hugely likely to say, you know what, I liked Kasich, but I'll vote for Trump. Or I liked Rubio, but I will vote for Trump. And this seemed to be mirrored in the New Hampshire voters that we spoke to, Lewis. There weren't many Republicans who had sort of milquetoast feelings about Donald Trump. Either they were supporting Trump or they would not consider supporting Trump. The only question is what will happen at the convention if it is contested still at that point.
Yeah, it seems, and he's very polarizing. I mean, either you're Trump or you're not Trump. And with Democrats, it's a bit different where you will have, of course, many Democrats saying, well, if it's not Bernie, I'll vote for Hillary. Or if it's not Hillary, yeah, I'll vote for Bernie. I don't think Republicans feel that way about Donald Trump at all.
I don't think so whatsoever. And you're right. I mean, on the Democratic side, the trends make it pretty clear that if there were 12 months left before Super Tuesday, Bernie Sanders would have a very good chance of taking over the lead from Hillary Clinton in a significant way. With just over 10 days left until Super Tuesday, different story, and time is absolutely a factor. Okay, the next Republican primary is in South Carolina. I have very, very disturbing poll data for you. PPP, which is an admittedly Democratic pollster, polled South Carolina Republicans. And I don't even want to talk about the sort of lead, right? I mean, Donald Trump has a lead. He's at 35%. Cruz and Rubio are each at 18%, 10% for John Kasich. Fair enough. I want to talk about some of the specific questions that South Carolina Republicans have been polled on. South Carolina Republicans are nutty, Lewis. I mean, their political views are outrageous. Let's put this up on the screen for people who are watching along with us. I'll tell you about some of the findings from this poll. 30% of South Carolina Republicans, this is just crazy. 30% of South Carolina Republicans wish the South had won the Civil War. Now, from that group who thinks who wishes the South had won the Civil War, Donald Trump has 38% of those, and Ted Cruz has 35% of those. So overwhelmingly, if you are a Republican that supports the idea that the South, it would have been better for the South to win the Civil War, you are very likely to be either a Trump or Cruz supporter. 20% of South Carolina Republicans, 1 in 5, want to ban gay people from even entering the United States. What do you do with the ones that are already here? I don't know. I guess they're allowed to stay reluctantly. And of those who support banning gays, a plurality, 31%, support Donald Trump. 60% of South Carolina Republicans support banning Muslims from entering the United States. 80% of them are Trump supporters. Absolutely incredible. 67%. Something about these numbers that don't make exact sense, Lewis, but we will go back and take a look at that. Okay, continuing. 50 unusual numbers here, but we will get to the bottom of that.
Maybe it's that these people support the ideas of both candidates.
Yes,
that could be
that may well be. 54% of South Carolina Republican voters support the Confederate flag in the Capitol building. Again, those are disproportionately likely to be concentrated among Trump and Ted Cruz supporters. And lastly, I don't know if this is low or high, only 10% of South Carolina Republicans think that whites are literally a superior race to other races. So, Lewis, let's get back and talk about this. When you hear that 10%, 1 in 10 South Carolina Republicans think whites are the superior race, does that strike you as shockingly high or low, given what else we know about South Carolina Republicans?
I think if we're talking about South Carolina Republicans here, I think that seems a little bit low when you look at the rest of those numbers.
Right.
When you look at
hey, 20%.
It's kind of a relief actually to hear that
it's only that low. It's really funny how Donald Trump is associated with these so-called New York values by Ted Cruz, but it's actually Trump and Cruz's supporters that are the closest ideologically. I mean, on most of these outrageous positions, South Carolina Republicans are very likely to support either Trump or Cruz. I mean, Trump and Cruz, for all of the critiques about he's a liar, he has the New York values, blah, 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 they are coalescing the extremist Republican support, which is pretty fascinating. A viewer emailed me about the Civil War thing and said, David, the North would be better off if the South had won the Civil War. They would have separated. The northern states wouldn't be, by and large, subsidizing the southern states, and the North would be way better off as a country.
Well, who knows if that's really how it would have happened.
Right.
Right. And we wouldn't have oil, Dave. I mean, oil is big business. We need Texas for big oil, right?
Right.
And we wouldn't have all that beautiful warm weather either.
Well, yes, that's absolutely true. And speaking about warm weather, January was another record warm month. I know it seems like every month we do this story. We're not repeating the story. January 2016 was a record warm month, according to new data released by NASA. You may recall that last year was the hottest year on record for the planet. And by NASA's accounting, December was the warmest December on record. And now January 2016 was the warmest January on record. In 135 years of record keeping, January 2016 was about 1.13 degrees Celsius, or a little over 2 degrees Fahrenheit, above normal. This is the 4th month in a row where the planet was more than 1 degree Celsius above normal. According to NASA, temperatures in some parts of the Arctic were 23 degrees Fahrenheit above normal for the month. Now, you might think, David, you're missing a decimal point there. You mean 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit? No. Temperatures in some parts of the Arctic averaged over 23 degrees above normal. There are those, Lewis, who insist this is just cyclical. People who are confused about weather versus climate, people who say, what can we really say about a month or a year that is warm when we have presumably billions of years here, and most of those years we don't have temperature data for? We will speak today to a geologist who is an expert in exactly this issue, and he's going to explain to us, Lewis, how the climate skeptics who say, hey, we can't know anything because we just don't have enough data, they are very, very wrong about this. We should be very concerned about what we are observing here in terms of worldwide temperature trends.
Yes, I would recommend to anyone who has a scientist tell them that we don't have enough evidence to just never listen to that scientist again and immediately write them off.
It's sort of frustrating, and this may be the understatement of the century. It's frustrating that We've known about climate change for a while. We know big corporations who benefit from climate damaging activities have known about it for a long time and have covered it up, sometimes for decades. We know essentially what we need to do to fix or start fixing this. And we also know that the longer you wait to take drastic steps, the more drastic and expensive the eventual steps will ultimately need to be. And yet we have this status quo where energy companies are just making money, damaging the environment. We have widespread opposition to carbon taxes, which have actually been shown, it's been demonstrated that they would be very effective in curbing some significant portion of the damage we're doing. We just can't seem to do it. There's no political will. Everything has to happen slowly. Over 50 years, we'll make a 20% reduction to the electricity that is generated from one particular I mean, it's just crazy, Lewis, how totally unable we are to really make drastic change here.
And I think in some ways we can point the finger at the media as well, playing the false equivalency game with people on both sides of the issue. That's really slowing the process down. And
I don't deny that when it's 56 degrees in Boston on February 13th, as it was a couple days ago, February 16th, 15th. What day is it today? I don't even know. Anyway, over the last 24 to 48 hours, it was insanely warm here. And I get that it's cool, right? Because we're used to frigid winters. But when it happens, you know something is wrong, right?
It's and of course we can't point to one or 2 days and say, but yes, the evidence does show this, and you're right. While I enjoy it, it kind of irks me.
I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at lewismotamedy. Tell us what you think about this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
You may have no idea how our show is funded because I don't really talk about it very often. It's something I like to generally just kind of keep under wraps. And if someone asks, I'll mention, we're not funded by big media conglomerates or huge multinational corporations, right, Lewis? I mean, I know you know this, but a lot of people might not because it doesn't come up on the show very often. We do have this thing called membership, and today's new member of the day is Catherine White. And the more you pay attention to the 2016 election, I can only assume you will realize that the coverage you get from corporate media really isn't telling you the whole story. You're really getting a very, very corporate perspective. So vote with your dollars, really vote with your pennies, and support an alternative to corporate media. Become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Catherine White did it. She's today's member of the day. You can do it, and you can get instant access to all of the exclusive member benefits, including the world famous, literally world famous, Lewis, bonus show. You're the host, I'm the sidekick, and it's pretty compelling stuff, I won't lie.
Compelling for any number of reasons.
Absolutely. No question about it. davidpakman.com/membership is the place to do it. Let's get right into, Lewis, Hatriot Mail. Well, before I talk about it, let me remind you what we are talking about when we talk about Hatriot Mail.
Brace yourselves for the only information that can successfully penetrate a tinfoil hat. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
We've talked about the anti-Semitic Bernie Sanders related stuff heating up. He is, of course, the first presidential candidate who is not Christian. And I do consider, I mean, Mormons follow Jesus to some degree. So I do consider Mitt Romney to be, even as a Mormon, within the scope of the Jesus-following religions and as such somewhat Christian. Bernie Sanders, the first non-Christian to win a presidential primary. The anti-Semitic stuff about him is heating up. The anti-Semitic stuff about me is heating up. This may be some of the most vile anti-Semitism we've ever seen on the program. I want to warn you, it is very, very aggressive. I would get the kids out of the room. I would get, probably your pets out of the room. I mean, I know that they can't understand necessarily the words, but pets understand tone, Lewis. And the tone is aggressive here. Take a listen.
Fuck you and your show, you fucking kike. Thanks for telling us not to count on you worthless Jew cunt coward fucks for anything in a life and death situation with Luis's Reno comment. And why don't you get over that cold? Or do you just have a cliche Jew closed-nose voice? Say bagels, motherfucker. Huygen, Huygen, faggot.
Can you can you make sense out of this, Lewis? What is your rano comment? What does that mean? Rano.
Does it mean random or something like that?
I have no idea.
What's rano?
I'm not sure. Rano. It's weird.
It doesn't make sense to me, but I don't think much of anything this Hatriot has to say makes sense.
We have a member named Rano. That's his first name. But we haven't spoken about him in a long time. I mean, he's been a member for a while. He was a member of the day years ago.
Okay. I wasn't talking about Rano.
Prepare yourselves. This stuff, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, or it seems like he could be the nominee, this is going to be rampant. Don't kid yourselves. It is, prepare yourselves for absolute insanity. I know you're ready, Lewis, and hopefully the audience is too. Hey, remember that guy Stuart Varney from Fox News, who now is mostly over on the Fox Business Channel? He did an interview yesterday with a former Navy SEAL who claims to have shot Osama Bin Laden dead. He was interviewed on Fox Business by Stuart Varney, and he was asked about women in combat, and his non-sexist response visibly shocked Stuart Varney. Now, this is the same Stuart Varney whose greatest hits include, as we've covered previously on the show, calling global warming nonsense. And we can put this up for people to see here, Lewis. Calling global warming nonsense. He exploded in anger when the Pope talked about climate change, the audacity of that Pope. Stuart Varney was outraged that states were still feeding poor people in spite of cuts to the food stamp programs. Stuart Varney suggested that President Obama proposed free preschool to toddlers so that they can vote for him in the future. That's really a long-term plan. I mean, Obama's got 10 months left in office or whatever. And also claimed that the good jobs numbers that the Bureau of Labor Statistics released under President Obama were all a liberal conspiracy to trick us into thinking the economy is doing okay. So that's the Stuart Varney we're talking about. He was visibly shocked when this former Navy SEAL said, "Hey, I have no problem with women in with women in combat roles. This is so crazy. I'm having a coughing fit." Let's take a look.
What do you make? Can I ask you for a flat-out judgment? Do you think that women should be part of special op teams that go in and shoot down Osama bin Laden?
Well, Stuart, thanks for having me today. You know, I've operated with women. They've actually come with us on special operations. We use them a lot for some of the searching of women and children, cultural sensitivity type stuff. Also, another thing that I know that these Islamic fighters, they don't fear death, but they do fear hell. And if they're killed by women, they go to hell as far as they know. So, I mean, I like to say, you know, lock and load, ladies. If they don't lower the standards, and they can pass them, yeah, I think they should get a shot.
That's interesting. If they don't lower the standards and they pass the standards and for everybody else, you have no problem with that. Look, Rob, I've never been in combat. I've never fired a gun in anger in my life. I've never been shot at either. I've barely been in a fist fight. But, you know, so I don't understand combat. But are you telling me that you're perfectly okay going into a life and death situation with a woman by your side? I'm told that it changes the dynamics of the group that you're operating with.
It could potentially change the dynamic, and the last thing I'm suggesting is we make the military, especially special operations, a social experiment. But if the standards stay the same, you know, it's equal opportunity type stuff. If they can make it.
So was anyone surprised when Stuart Varney said he had never been in combat? I don't think so. So this was not necessarily the most progressive and open-minded statement from the former Navy SEAL, right? Saying, listen, we use women to search women and children, and for cultural sensitivity type stuff, sort of like, that cultural sensitivity type stuff, we bring women along. We use them in very particular roles. But the real thing here for me is Stuart Varney visibly shocked that a former Navy SEAL would say, why women? Yes, I've operated with women, and women are people, and they do stuff. Yeah, no problem.
And we have discussed this. It must have been a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I think we discussed a story where the standards, the tests you have to pass, the physical exams, they were lowered for women. And I said that I did not favor that, but I'm completely fine with, you know, these tests exist for a reason, especially when it comes to special ops. I agree with this guy.
What you have to look at with the tests is, are the requirements based on what you would reasonably expect from the top X% of men, or are these the requirements based on the specific actions that an individual would have to take on the battlefield, right? And depending on how those determinations are made, you could make a very strong case that either there should or shouldn't be different requirements for men and women. Totally separate conversation, though, than to what's being had here.
And Varney clearly shocked. He says he's shocked.
Yeah.
But I don't see the big deal.
In spite of having no idea what it's like to be in combat, Varney feels perfectly able and comfortable countering the opinion of a former Navy SEAL on how he should feel serving with women in combat. This is a microcosm of Fox News and Fox Business Network.
It is. Apart from that, maybe this is just part of it. I mean, I'll say this, aside from how many pull-ups a woman can do.
Right.
They can shoot just as well as anybody. And when the vast majority of what you're doing is firing guns, but of course, still, I don't expect Varney to understand this. And he sounds like a guy who really watches a lot of movies and stuff like that.
And Lewis, of course, being sort of tongue-in-cheek when he says the vast majority of what is being done is firing guns, just so everybody doesn't flip out. Chelsea Clinton has been campaigning for her mom, Hillary Clinton. She said that Bernie Sanders' proposal to end mass incarceration in the United States is, quote, worrying. But she says it's worrying not because it's a bad idea to reduce incarceration, but because it's a totally unpragmatic idea that ignores what is even possible in government. So Bernie Sanders has a vision on incarceration. It includes abolishing for-profit prisons, legalizing marijuana, eliminating mandatory minimum sentences for drug-related crimes, and it makes absolute and perfect sense. And Chelsea Clinton said, listen, it's not achievable. And we have a majority of inmates held at state, not federal prisons, so the president can't even make a lot of these decisions. And we need someone that understands how the government works. Chelsea Clinton says it is her mother who understands how government works. This is a growing critique of Bernie, right? Okay, yeah, Bernie is the visionary, and maybe a lot of his ideas sound good, but it's not pragmatic. And as a result, we should go with Hillary Clinton, who is far more moderate, but much more realistic. But there's a sort of bigger issue here. We can have the visionary versus pragmatic debate, and we have had it before, Lewis. The bigger issue is Hillary Clinton has also called to an end to the era of mass incarceration. She gave a speech in April of 2015 where she said there are hard truths about race and justice. She said the era of mass incarceration must end. Police must wear body cameras. And she wasn't more nuanced, saying, and I know that because most of these inmates are in state prison, I actually would have to negotiate with governors and mayors and whoever. She made very similar comments to Bernie Sanders, the comments that now Chelsea Clinton is criticizing Bernie for. It feels like very transparent sort of political posturing, and it really seems like it is not adding anything to the reasonable debate that has, for the most part, been had on the Democratic side.
Transparent to us, right?
Yeah.
But probably striking fear in many people. Because they are just not aware of everything that Hillary has said. So it's typical campaign stuff.
I'd be shocked if Chelsea Clinton actually had any disagreements with Bernie Sanders on the policies of mass incarceration that he's proposing to change. And it would be hard to imagine that she would, because they're basically the same policies that over the last 12 to 24 months, Hillary Clinton has talked about, except in a slightly different context, and in a context where she apparently is presumed to know the sort of specifics and logistics of how it would all work. I think that this is a pretty empty attack, and it really goes back to pragmatic versus visionary and what that really means. And as I've said before, with the Republican Congress, with the Republican House and a possibly Republican Senate, pragmatic versus visionary may not end up making that much of a difference one way or the other. So why not have the more progressive candidate there? Bigger conversation that we will continue to have, and we can have it on our Facebook page at facebook.com/David Pakman Show anytime you like.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Jan Zalasiewicz, a geologist at the University of Leicester. Jan, it's so great to speak with you. You know, I've read with great interest and seen your videos with great interest about what you describe as the Anthropocene, an era in which you believe we currently are on Earth. For people who may not be familiar with your work, let's start there at the broadest possible point. What is it that you're describing?
We're looking, colleagues and I, who were working on this relatively new idea of the Anthropocene, which we are studying as a potential new geological epoch of the Earth, basically taking different kinds of environmental change to the physical structure of the Earth, to the chemistry, and to its biology, and translating that, into geology, if you like, to see what kind of record of rocks and fossils we will leave behind us, to show how different or similar, the current Earth is by comparison with some of the big geological changes of the past.
I've read a fair bit of sort of what's described as prehistory. And one of the most interesting elements of prehistory to me, and this includes looking at the formations of our planet, is that there seem to be long periods of time in the geological history of our planet that we will likely never know much about. In other words, because of the geological realities, we just don't have much evidence that we can find to sort of suss out some of the details of what was going on our planet at particular points in time. Talk to me a little bit about what you see being available in the future to figure out what was going on currently on Earth. In other words, is the type of evidence that will be left behind from industrialization and what is currently happening on Earth, how will that compare to what we can now determine about prior eras on Earth?
Well, that's a great question, and it does go to the heart, if you like, of geology and the processes on Earth. We have a pretty good idea of what kind of things get preserved in strata and what don't, and even where they might get preserved and where they won't, based on our experience of strata. You're quite right. There are some parts of Earth history where we know very little. The first billion years of Earth history, almost all the rocks have been changed, reworked, made unrecognizable, so we have little evidence. But after that, we have a pretty good and increasingly good record as we go towards the present, particularly over the last few 100 million years of Earth history. And if we, let's say, take our current landscape and see what will fossilize and what won't, well, one would predict that, let's say, San Francisco will not fossilize because it's on a part of the crust that is rising, that is being eroded. So there'll be little bits of San Francisco which will form pebbles and sand grains and mud flakes, in the Pacific Ocean, out there. So that has little chance. But somewhere like, let's say, New Orleans, which is on the Mississippi Delta, which is naturally subsiding, but the crust is subsiding. So the delta, if you like, is being buried under new layers of sand and mud, and that's a process that's been going on continually for millions of years. And in environments like that, very delicate structures can get preserved. Fossil leaves and twigs, and that's a kind of an environment. You find dinosaur footprints, things which are, very delicate, can be washed away in an afternoon. And yet if you bury them, with sand and mud, and that sand and mud keeps on piling up, you can preserve a very good picture of past landscapes and environments. So one can imagine that the foundations of New Orleans, some of the drainage, the electrical, the sewage systems, the foundations of buildings, which can go back tens of meters and which are made of reinforced concrete and brick. A lot of those can survive. They will change, once they're buried deep down, but nonetheless, paleontologists know how to reconstruct, structures like that. So yes, we will leave a fossil record.
And Jan, from a geological perspective, Is the advent of plastics a game changer of sorts, given what we know about what happens to plastic over relatively long periods of time? I mean, I imagine this scenario where I don't know how many years from now, somebody could be left with the impression, if they dig up the United States, for example, that the big McDonald's M was representative not of a fast food restaurant, but of some kind of incredibly powerful a king or something like that. I mean, talk to us a little bit about whether modern materials are changing what we will leave behind.
Well, again, a great question. Plastic is probably not a game changer, but it is an important part of the various novel types of chemistry and structure that we humans have made, and there's been nothing like plastics, in the past 4.5 billion years of history of the Earth, of that particular kind of chemistry, those particular kinds of polymers. And there's a lot of them. We've made something like 5 billion tons of plastic, so mainly over the last 50 years. And we know they're durable. We know that they can last for tens, probably hundreds of years, and probably thousands and millions once they're buried in strata. There are other things as well. We make yet more concrete. Again, concrete is a particular kind of rock that has only been made by humans. And we've made something like 500 billion tons of concrete, enough for about a kilo for every square meter of the Earth's surface. So we're producing large amounts of what we can call novel types of mineral and rock, and fossil indeed as well. And those are part of, if you like, the signature that we are leaving everywhere over the surface of the Earth, and that will get incorporated, into strata now forming, and strata that can preserve for millions of years.
So let's talk a little bit about the specific characteristics of the Anthropocene. Sort of a two-part question. Number one, in what ways are the sort of current status quo of what we are doing to the planet different than what humans have done to the planet in the past? And number two, what do you say to those who generally, when presented with a hypothesis that either to the climate or to the planet, or described however, humans aren't really doing anything, any changes that we can sort of quantify today are just part of a natural cycle? We hear that from climate skeptics in many ways. Address that generally, if you can.
Sure. Yeah. There is, scientists in general, and geologists in particular, I think, are getting increasingly good at making these kinds of comparisons between present and past, to say what is a natural variation and what is really different. For instance, if we look at, for instance, the composition of the atmosphere, which we know has an ability to change, if you like, the temperature at the Earth's surface, through the proportions of radiation that it can either trap or it can release. We know that the amount of carbon dioxide, in the atmosphere is now higher than it has been for at least 800,000 years, because there are layers of ice and snow in Greenland, and particularly in Antarctica, where you've got, in effect, fossil air, which you can drill down 4 kilometers through solid ice and extract little bubbles of air from that, and get a record of history of both atmospheric composition and through different types of chemistry of climate, how climate has gone up and down. Mm-hmm. And we know that as temperature has gone up and down, so the amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere have gone up and down as well. And we know that the last time we had this amount of carbon dioxide in the climate was about 3 million years ago, in the Pliocene epoch, when temperatures were a few degrees higher on average, when sea level was somewhere around 10 to 20 meters higher than it is at the moment. And we have a record of going back even longer to events again in the past, where there have been perturbations of the carbon cycle, which have been accompanied by changes to climate, by changes to the animals and plants and the populations. There have been extinctions, species radiation, things like that.
Now, Jan, couldn't someone say, and I ask this merely as to sort of fully understand, could the argument not be made, hey, what if we're just in a sort of 3 million year cycle? I mean, when we're talking about geological time and planetary time, these are huge time durations. How can we say with certitude if there was a point 3 million years ago where we had this level of temperature and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, could it not be a very long natural cycle?
There are, what we can see, again, if we look at the way, there are cycles of different periodicities and different rates, and some of the cycles that we can see, there are cycles of 20,000 years, 40,000 years, 100,000 years, which are due to basically astronomy, variations in the Earth's spin and orbit, and these are picked out very well by climate variations and also by variations in things like the amounts of carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere. Now, if we track, let's say, simply just take one aspect, which is carbon dioxide, again, not the only part of the story, but a big one, the rate of increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we can quite unequivocally, it's over 100 times faster than it was even at the end of the last ice age. When it over several thousand years, it rose by about 100 parts per million. Now, since the Industrial Revolution, it's increased by a similar amount and more, in fact, in the space of just a couple of centuries. And we know of no comparable rate or speed of increase in the geological past. There might have been far, far back, but we simply have no evidence of that. Where we have better evidence, in these last, particularly the last 800,000 years, we can see nothing of that scale and speed. So, however it pans out, and the smart money is that yes, it is beginning to, and it will further warm the climate. It is a very distinctive type of change, to the Earth. It's one of a number. The Anthropocene is not just about climate. In fact, climate is currently a relatively small part of the array, the spectrum of changes of the Anthropocene. But if we take the change in the composition of the atmosphere, that can be shown to be extraordinarily rapid.
Well, hard to argue with those numbers, no question about it. I've been speaking with Jan Zalasiewicz, a geologist at the University of Leicester. Thank you so much for talking to us about this.
Okay, thank you. You're welcome.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to talk about a story that's been going viral over the last 24 hours. Probably 20 or 30 people have emailed it to me, and there's a lot of misinformation going on about it. The U.S. Marshals said that they made several attempts over the last 3 years to get a man named Paul Aker to court, claiming he refused. So they issued a warrant for his arrest. And now Aker is telling his side of the story, saying the force used by U.S. Marshals was excessive in getting him to court, but most importantly, that he was arrested for student loan debt. And it is true that Paul Aker owed about $1,500 for a student loan dating all the way back to 1987. But the story is not being reported correctly. The story is being reported, Lewis, as he is in court, almost as in like a debtor's court. He was arrested because he owed money on a student loan, and this could happen to anyone with outstanding or overdue student loans. Not true. He failed to show up for a court-ordered deposition back in 2006 when a lawsuit was brought against him for failure to pay his federal student loan. So this was a bench warrant, basically saying it doesn't matter why you're supposed to show up in court. You were supposed to show up and you didn't. Thus, you were supposed to be taken into custody, brought to appear, and then you were released, right? You're not jailed for the crime of not paying student loans. You're being brought in by U.S. Marshals because you missed a court appearance. So I am the first person, Lewis, to say we have a student loan crisis in this country. We have predatory student loans. We have an exploding cost of college issue, everything from fees to books to tuition. It's all crazy. It's all completely corrupt and insane. But the headline that now he and all sorts of other people are going to be arrested just because they have student loan debt that they can't or haven't been paying. This was a lawsuit. He was ordered to appear to represent, to speak on this lawsuit, and he didn't. It could have been for anything, ridiculous or not ridiculous. And I think we have to get the facts straight here. And the viral stories that have been going around are really missing some key points.
Okay, that is true. There are many people who have student loan debt, though. This was one person who they decided to actually go after. And by that, I mean whoever he owed this money to.
Right.
So, I mean, in a sense, it was foolish not to go to court. It was foolish not to go to court. But what
when you're
amazes
sued,
me,
you should show up in court.
You should show up in court, yes. But that it even came to that over
Right.
such a small amount of money, and that now a lot of money and time invested in having the U.S. Marshals dealing with this.
Yeah.
That's pretty shocking.
Totally agree. And a source at the U.S. Marshal's Office reportedly told Fox 26 that they may be serving similar warrants on 1,200 to 1,500 people over lawsuits related to student loan debts. So absolutely, this is crazy. It's an absolutely absurd use of time. We shouldn't even be getting to lawsuits over student loans. But that's the problem. Once there is a lawsuit and a court says you must appear, it almost becomes background what the specific reason is. We have to be nuanced here. I'm not defending anything in particular here with regard to these practices, but this was a bench warrant.
And now this gets even more ridiculous because taxpayer dollars are
Right.
being used
Insane.
to go after the people who owe student debt money to these companies.
And no doubt, by the way, that U.S. Marshals, a group of U.S. Marshals showing up fully armed to bring a guy in who is served a bench warrant for owing money on a student loan. I mean, that's completely nuts, and we've talked about overuse of force, no doubt about that.
It's completely nuts, and it's a shame that that the enforcement of this is being socialized. You know, it's our money that is paying for this now.
Boxer Manny Pacquiao is also a politician. He's currently a member of the House of Representatives in the Philippines, and he's a candidate for Senate in the Philippines. He's also a so-called Christian. He has said in the past that it's sinful to use condoms. It is sinful to commit abortion. And he's also made outrageous comments about gay people. The latest comment that is going viral is as follows, saying, "It's just common sense. Have you seen any animal having male to male or female to male to female relations?" He said, "We're better than animals because they recognize gender differences." I'm sorry. He said animals were better because they recognize gender differences, going on to say, if you have male to male or female to female relationships, then people are worse than animals. So the first absurdity is that there is homosexuality in hundreds, if not thousands, of animal species. So his entire analysis, and I use that term loosely, is based on a total misunderstanding of the animal kingdom. But then he doubled down. He put up an Instagram post which said, he put up a picture of himself with his wife, and then he put up an Instagram post, and that post says, and I think we can get that. Do we have that in more detail? We don't have that in more detail. He says, "I rather obey the Lord's command than obeying the desires of the flesh. I'm not condemning anyone, but I'm just telling the truth of what the Bible says. The truth from the Bible is what changed me from my old ways." And then he goes on to say, "Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who have sex with men are going to be inheriting the kingdom of God." He really feels strongly about this. I mean, this is the third or fourth time that he's been public about his anti-gay views, and he always says, Lewis, that tired old thing, "I'm not against gay people. I'm against homosexuality. The people are fine, but the homosexuality isn't." This has been less common in the U.S. over the last 6 to 12 months, Lewis, as we've seen same-sex marriage bans nationally banned, etc. But Manny Pacquiao, who is Filipino, of course, he's really sticking with this. It's not particularly good for his PR. I don't think he really cares.
I think he's done anyway. The shame is that he is a member of the House of Representatives in the Philippines. He's a legislator. And it's a shame because people like Pacquiao. People look up to him. I suppose in many ways he's a role model for kids. Athletes tend to be.
Yeah, although I don't know how an anti-gay boxer is a good role model for kids, but
that's my point exactly. He isn't.
Yeah.
And so it's unfortunate. He's just he's a victim of religion.
We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting voicemail I received. Take a listen to this.
Good morning, David, sir. This is a message from North Dakota. I was calling about, hey, what is Lewis all up his ass about David or Bernie Sanders feel the burn? Who in the hell wants that old damn old teacher, doc or whatever? Tell him to go back in his fucking DeLorean and get the fuck out of here, idiot. Who wants him? I don't want that old bastard to have a heart attack. Keel over fucking right after he gets elected. Who wants that? And then who wants you? See, they know all the Republicans are bitching. Oh yeah, Hillary, all this shit. Because they're scared of Hillary because they don't want Hillary because you get exactly what you guys are saying. They want Bernie in there. So
okay, I think you get the idea of this. What is this guy talking about? He's angry that you're feeling the burn. I guess is his argument.
I'm not the only person in the world who wants Bernie Sanders to be president.
He seems fixated on you.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, Dakota guy, Bernie has a huge following. People like his ideas. He's a smart guy. I'm one of those many, many people.
On the bonus show today, we will talk about 2 football players who received votes in New Hampshire. Well, football player and a coach. We will talk about the Silk Road revived. What is the Silk Road? We will discuss. We will also talk to you about Operation Nitro Zeus, which you may find very, very interesting. DavidPakman.com/membership is how you sign up and get instant access to the world-famous bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.